Thanks again, Andy, for that. And I think it's very good presentation to set the background in relation to what the theme we're going to speak to today. And continually through the day, I know that all the speakers are going to reference back to Andy's presentation because that's the groundwork. And I got some nuggets from that as well, especially in relation to architecture and how we're going to look at progressing with that in the cloud and so on like that. And planning to fail is a very interesting point, which I'll address as well as we go through. So a small bit about myself. I know most of you personally at this stage from coming along to these sort of events. Essentially, I'm a cybersecurity expert with over 2 decades experience. I'm not going to spend too much time plugging all that good stuff, but I know a lot of you from time to time in your careers, people have probably often said to you, listen, wouldn't it be great, you know, if you could bottle what you have, and because everybody wants that piece of information, especially for people that have been in the industry a long time. And so one of the things we have coming out is in a can executive online training. So it's just a little bit of a heads up on that. It's going to be available in January on topics like this, specifically designed for executives to cut straight through the bull, to demystify the subject matter and give you enough information on what you need to do to address a particular subject. But happy to talk to any of you offline about any particular subjects or areas you want on that and so on. So a lot of you will have seen ICTTF in relation to this event, and some of you are more familiar than others. Well, the ICTTF is the International Cyber Threat Task Force, and it's a not-for-profit organisation which was founded just nearly a year ago. And pretty much this time last year, Aircom supported an event on cybercrime, cyber threats and those sort of areas, and in the midst of the snow nearly 100 people turned up to hear about that and hear the message that wasn't about plugging products or being a vendor or anything like that, but plugging those gaps in people's knowledge to say, look, there's a lot of hype out there, and what's the real information. So as I go through, the presentation is peppered with references to ICTTF and where you can get more information, things like that, and you'll understand. But there's actually a free portal you can use as well and sign up, and there's nearly 2,000 members on that from over 100 countries at the moment, exchanging information, helping each other with various areas in relation to information security, cyber threats and so on. Okay, so now on to the subject matter, cloud computing. Well, obviously a lot of people will be familiar with the underground sign. We've all been to London, I'm sure, at this stage. And if you've been on the underground, no doubt you've heard the announcement to mind the gap. Okay? And, excuse me, a bit too much caffeine there this morning. So mind the gap, and essentially that's what my presentation now is about. It's about minding the gap to going from traditional computing into cloud computing. And what I want to give you is the heads up in relation to the main sort of things that you want to look out for. Now, I'm not getting into the technical stuff. I'm getting into areas from governance, from risk, from compliance. From a business perspective, you've heard a lot of hype about the cloud, you've heard a lot of things, and you want to know, well, okay, how do I move into it? Because vendor A says this, vendor B says this. I find lots of stuff when I Google it, but I'm really a little bit lost. So what I'm going to hopefully do is give you the top 10 things that you'll need to consider, and you need to talk to your CSP, your cloud service provider, about before entering the cloud. And most of them will affect every one of you in relation to any sort of cloud-based solutions. Okay, so the cloud is really about evolution. If we look at evolution, we've had really 3 areas of evolution in our own society as humans and so on like that. We had the agricultural, we had the industrial age, and now we're in the information age. But within each of those, if we look at those, for example, if we look at the industrial age, everybody went about making or doing whatever they did. They made their bits and pieces or whatever. But what they also had to do is they had to make their own power. Right? They had to make their own electricity. They used windmills, they used water turbines and all those sort of things. And essentially they were limited to whatever power that they could create in order to manufacture or produce within the industrial age. So they used their windmills and so on. Along came the grid, electricity and so on. And the industrial age went straight up. Everybody was able to produce more. They could plug into a grid system and everything else like that. And productivity went through the roof. Now if we look at the information age, it's been around a while. We're all very familiar with the IT, and it's the biggest industry there, and everybody's working away in it. But we've all made our own power. We've all did our own computing power, our own things, with our own data centers, our own comms rooms, our own computer rooms, and so on. We've looked after those. We've ordered the servers. We've fed them. We've hugged the servers when we needed them. We've patched them. We've maintained them, upgraded them, bought license for them, backed them up, everything else. We've done all of that ourselves. And now we have the cloud, which is essentially like a grid, an electricity grid that you're going to be able to plug into, as Andy says, in an elastic nature to use as much as you want, and you pay for what you use, and you can retract your contracts and so on like that. So it's that flexibility which is actually going to change people's business models in a massive way. And that is essentially where the opportunity is. And that's why there's so much cynicism, if you like, around the cloud to a certain degree, because people say, oh, the cloud, it's an overused term in marketing and things like that. Absolutely agree. It's tagged onto everything. Salesforce.com, their sales doubled when they added the term cloud on front of it, because it is a marketing term at the end of the day, and people aren't quite sure what it is and so on like that. But it is going to be the biggest catalyst in business you're ever going to see in your lifetime, I can tell you. And we're going to go through some of that towards the end on the other presentations and so on. But if we look at the subwave, in relation to the information age, you'd be familiar with, well, some will be familiar with back in the 60s and 70s, we had IBM mainframes, went on to DECs, Intel PCs, Sun Client, Cisco IP, and now we're in the cloud. What probably relates even easier to you on that is if we look at this sort of ISP type model. You know, when the internet took off, we had ISPs here. They gave us access to the internet, and there was lots of those little ones around that started up, and then they started collaborating, getting bought out, and then there was only a few main ISPs. Then they had customers, and they decided, well, we've got to give the customer services, so what do? We'll give them email. So if you like, ISP 2.0 was providing email services, things like that. Then co-location, ASPs, as Andy mentioned, and now we're into the level of cloud service providers. So this is a natural progression within the information age anyway. And it's something that is continually evolving, continually developing with many factors. So the bottom line is we're at a point of change in relation to computing. And as Andy said, it's inevitable. And I have a slide, and I'm sure Matthew has a slide, Mark will have a slide somewhere that says, this is inevitable. It's going to happen. Nowhere else are you going to get a bigger heads up in relation to information technology than the cloud. It's coming, end of story. All the big guys are putting billions into it. So why would you want to operate in the cloud? Well, to summarize and re-emphasize some of the points that Andy made as well, you pay for what you use. Okay, so you're not going out buying tons of servers, paying wages or fees to have those maintained when you're only using 5% utilization, so on like that. You only pay for what you use. It's a very, very, very attractive model. It's a lower and predictable cost because we've got economies of scale. These guys can do it far cheaper and far better than most of us, right? Can run our own computer rooms, our own data centers. You shift from CapEx to OpEx. That's what everybody wants now. Don't want to be investing in capital expenditure, just want to take it out of operational expenditure all the time because it's easier to budget, easier to maintain, and so on like that. And you can accelerate speed to value. Because from your investment, from your idea, from that catalyst, from bang to flash, you can go really, really quickly with the cloud, because you can simply sign up for most services, or a lot of services, with a credit card. And great example Andy used in relation to the gaming things and so on like that, because sometimes you just can't predict what the uptake on something is going to be, or whatever it happens to be. So this is a great way to actually have almost an instant business model, because if you get the idea, it can become real, it can become almost tangible within hours using the cloud. Reduce management. You no longer have to water and feed the servers, no patching, no maintenance contracts, no IT overhead to look after those sort of areas and so on. Faster deployment. It's a multi-layered security. I hear all the time, oh, cloud's bad, security issues, blah, 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 all this sort of stuff. Look, most cloud providers, if you do due diligence on them, are doing a better job than you could ever hope to do, because most of them will have 24/7 operations, the most highly trained security operations center teams you're going to have. They have all the accreditations, everything else in place. Bottom line is they're probably going to do a better job than you could ever hope to do within your own budget constraints and so on like that. But there are steps you need to make sure that those things are in place. Reliability and fault tolerance. These guys are at the leading edge of technology. These guys are inventing what the new standards are, everything else like that. They have their finger on the pulse. If you're an insurance company, that's your job, insurance, not IT. Often as not, IT tends to try and almost take over the business model we're in. IT is a support function, security is a support function of the business and whatever the business objectives are. So it's very important to realize that as things go on. So if we look at this from the point of view of increased productivity, your users are pretty much going to be on the latest and greatest. Right? No need to plan, have we got a budget to upgrade that license? Do we have the time to do that? What about the change management involved? What about the risk in upgrading those servers? Everything else like that. It's all handled. So you don't have that management headache on that side of things. If you have internet collaboration, you're in the game with everybody else. Things interface with each other easier. It's easier to exchange data, which brings along its own set of risks, of course. But it's easier to do those. Instant self-provisioning, you manage yourself from control panels in most cases. What you want, more storage, more RAM, more processor, whatever it happens to be. And you can handle that yourself. But here's a very interesting one. getting back to my point there I made about IT being a support element of a business, or security being a support element of a business. All too often, IT is spent firefighting, reacting, 90% of the time, keeping the server going, keeping something up. Is that a hack? Is this security problem? And they're always behind. They're always trying to keep up and everything else like that. And they, you know, in most cases, do an unbelievable job at trying to keep things going within enterprises. But what if you took that IT expertise and you used it in a more strategic way to say, okay, how can we re-architect our business model? What cool technology is out there in the cloud? I want to use your IT expertise, and I want you to help our business move. And that's what the board level of business and senior management leaders within businesses need to do now with their IT departments. Free them up from this mundane grunt, to use the phrase from the public sector areas of computing, some of that, and get them to use their core skills to help the business actually improve efficiencies and models and everything else like that. And I think that's one of the golden things that's often overlooked in relation to the cloud, because you can redeploy your people far more effectively by using cloud-based technology. Cloud does lots of stats, and I'm a man that uses them all the time and then afterwards goes, oh yeah, but I hate stats because they're always inaccurate. Look, the bottom line is, it's worth hundreds of billions, no matter what area of industry you look at. And I'm fortunate enough that I deal with some very large international clients on a VP level, where you can see what the strategy is over the next 5-10 years. You can see where the thinking is. You can see where the billions of dollars are going to be invested. And every one of them has the word cloud in the middle of it. It is going to be here, so it's inevitable. You know, we've got to embrace it in a secure, strategic manner, because it's a significant opportunity. So businesses, whether you're a consultant, you're no longer going to be an IT consultant, you're going to be a cloud consultant, right? Everything's going to change. Everything's going to become around this area on those side of things. Okay, this is really, really important. It's up to you to work out your GRC requirements, because you can't abdicate responsibility in relation to any regulations, laws, or anything else like that. The buck stops with the business. Okay? So it doesn't matter what a sales guy tells you in a cloud provider, or what you read on a fancy website or whatever. It's up to you to work it all out. Because at the end of the day, if an auditor comes in, you need to prove to the auditor and not show them a printout from a website or show them an email or anything. You need evidence that you're complying. And one of the problems is that most regulations were not written with the cloud in mind. So you've got a huge challenge in relation to that area, and I'm going to delve down on that quite a bit as we go through. So it's very important to understand what that means. So I've banded about some acronyms there, especially in relation to GRC and so on. And what I'll do now is I'll explain what GRC is and why it's become such a big thing and why everybody's using that as well. Well, GRC is the acronym for Governance, Risk and Compliance, as you probably gathered at this stage. And if you do Google on it, or you do any search for it, you'll find lots of IT GRC solutions and everything else like that. Basically, GRC is common sense, and I'll explain what we mean by that. Great slide here on the hyper-extended enterprise and all that good stuff, right? We've got business issues that we all face, and forgive me if I'm teaching this okay, but we all know this good stuff. Innovation, collaboration, the supply chain, customer services, consumerization, and of course, virtualization and cloud computing. These are the issues. The impact is, look, we've got tons and tons of information. How do we handle it? It's growing at an enormous rate. Our infrastructure has to keep up. But this is the one, right? Increasing regulations. Now, to IT people, to security people all the time, it's not something that is initially in the forefront of their minds when they go to make decisions. And when you make a decision in relation to cloud providers or doing anything in the cloud, it's the number one thing you have to think of before you start thinking architecture, before you start thinking who will we deal with, what will we get from them and everything else. This is the number one thing that you need to think of. Because regulations are increasing, they're going to change, there's only going to ever be more regulation as we go through. Give you an idea how this all works. The board of any organization, large or small, they have what I refer to as input drivers. Okay? And depending on your business, depends on the input drivers you have. Because one business may, for example, need to be compliant with PCI, and I won't go too on that because Matthew's going to cover that later on. You may have to be compliant with ISO 27001. The Data Protection Act covers anybody who has personally identifiable information. There's lots and lots of different things depending on your business. If you have to work in oil and gas, you're going to have a completely different set than somebody who's in the transport business or somebody who's in the insurance industry or whatever it happens to be. These are input drivers. These are the things that the board has to be cognizant of when they make decisions in relation to any ICT strategy. And our ICT strategy, of course, is cloud-based strategy as well. So anything to do with security, anything to do with risk around those areas, they have to take all of those things into account. So you need to know what those input drivers are before you can make any decisions. Okay? And the board will use those when they're directing, monitoring, evaluating anything to do with ICT strategy. Some interesting ones here that are developing. I mean, there's more and more all the time. There's over 400 standards, right, in relation to this area and information security and so on. They cover 38 countries with over 10,000 overlapping controls. Now that's very interesting, right? And where I find myself going in and help arbitrate or work through these things with clients is because a lot of these things conflict with each other. Sarbanes-Oxley conflicts with the German Data Protection Act. If you happen to be a company operating in Germany, but you're listed on the New York Stock Exchange, you've got an issue, because which auditor are you going to please? Because if you keep 100% happy, the other guy is going to be disgruntled. So there's a lot of different things there that have to be taken into account in relation to this area. The Institute of Directors and NSAI actually came up with a very good governance standard, which I would predict is going to become an international standard in relation to governance. And it's interesting with our history in banking and so on like that, that we're actually going to be leaders in relation to governance and how things should be controlled and so on like that. But you're going to see a lot around SWIFT 3000, stuff like that. But you'll be familiar with some of these things. 27001, 38500 is actually a specific international standard on IT governance. 112 is on personal data, 2509 business continuity. And of course there'll be national laws, international laws and regulations. You get the gist, right? There's tons and tons and tons of these sort of requirements that have to be catered for. Now, what businesses have copped onto is, hey, there's a huge overlap in all this. We've been doing things in a siloed approach. We've been doing things where, and I've often walked into clients, and around the table will be data protection officer, guys in charge of the PCI project, guys in charge of business continuity, security officer, whatever. And they're all operating in silos. And then you'll have the IT security officer. And they're all operating in silos. It's the same information assets. It's the same stuff they're trying to do. They're trying to protect the organization. They're trying to uphold rules. So what organizations have copped onto is, you know what, there's an efficiency in joining all this together and having our own sort of framework, our own way of doing that. And let's just call that IT GRC. And it's very interesting, even you see some state bodies, even like ESB, I noticed, they've got their own head of IT GRC now at the moment. I saw floating around as a title. But the traditional model was to operate on a very siloed approach. Through these lovely transitions to the vein of every presenter. So so siloed and flexible, inconsistent and very costly way to operate. You're paying on the double, right? There's lots of stats around that as well, saying it's 50% more expensive to stay compliant by not joining this stuff up, right? Common sense tells you that, right? You don't need to hear from Gartner or pay for that stat. So the security challenges, getting back to everyday business, what does an organization have to face? They have to face managing the risks and threats throughout the enterprise. That's everything from hackers, cybercrime systems, all that good stuff. Prove compliance consistently and affordably, right? Log management systems, for example, which is a core part of a lot of regulations and stuff like that. Entry-level systems at the top end start at $250,000. That's out of the budget for most people. To even look at those sort of things. So you have to find other ways of handling this. Maybe look for service in the cloud or whatever it happens to be. Secure access for increased mobility and collaboration. You have to give your end users what they want. And we actually have a new generation of a workforce that don't treat privacy the same way it's always been treated, or security in the same way. They're used to tweeting out, I'm on my way here, or a Facebook update that they're doing this and so on. That's the workforce that's coming in and wants to bring their own equipment and wants to use their own equipment. And you have to allow them to be flexible and use their stuff, but you have to be able to meet that challenge as well at the same time and control that risk that's associated with that. And of course we have virtualization and cloud computing. That's going to happen because that's going to save businesses money. So there's no business in the world isn't going to adapt some sort of cloud-based model. I mentioned keeping track of proving consistently and affordably around your compliance element like that. What do you do? Do you get your legal? Do you contact solicitors? Do you go to accountants? Do you go to your IT provider? How do you do this? Right? It's a massive, massive headache for people, and to have a strategy around it. There we go. Oops, sorry. 20% of IT time is spent on compliance. Again, a lovely Gartner stat. But it's 20%, and I believe it, is spent on compliance because they are now interfacing with auditors and interfacing with internal audit and compliance within organizations so much that 20% of their time is being taken up on that. Great fun with the buzzer today. Okay, this summarizes why people are adopting IT GRC. This is a recent stat from an IT Policy Compliance Institute, and they went and they interviewed and audited and assessed and evaluated people that have joined it all up, and they said, okay, you've now joined up all this stuff around governance, risk and compliance. What effect has it had on your business? 17% higher revenue, 40% higher profits, 18% higher customer satisfaction rates, 70% higher customer retention levels. That's the good stuff. Revenue, profits, customer satisfaction, customer retention. The financial losses are down, the risk and cost of compliance is down. What board member is not going to say, we're doing this GRC thing, right? So that's the challenge, because that's it. You may call it a different thing within your organization, unified framework, holistic compliance, whatever buzzwords you put on it, whatever, it is essentially GRC at the end of the day. The silver bullet, Andy. So is the cloud a silver bullet for all of this? Because And don't get me wrong, I am a fan and an advocate of the cloud, but the purpose of my presentation here is to tell you about some of the downsides of some of the things that you need to consider. But overall, it's going to happen now, and it's a good thing. But it's not a silver bullet for all of this, because going back to what I said at the very start of this presentation, you can't abdicate responsibility in relation to governance, risk and compliance. You can outsource it, you can get help with it, but you have responsibility as a business at the end of the day. So what I'm going to do is, in no particular order as they say in the best talent shows, I'm going to go through 10 of the main areas of GRC that you mightn't necessarily immediately think of. Now, I could have came up with the bog standard 10 that people have around the cloud and so on, but I want to just be a little bit different and just think of some different ones that you might necessarily think of, to get your mind working, to get your mind thinking of, oh, he's right, yeah, I never thought of how that might work, or that's a risk, or that's an area, or whatever. So hopefully as I go through these 10, it'll become very clear that there are issues that are not the traditional type of computing issues that you need to actually consider. They're almost business issues or risk-related issues. Okay. Control and responsibility. There's different models of the cloud. We've talked, actually, you know, I think there's something like 14 defined different standards in relation to the cloud. ENISA has one, NIST has another, and there's all different variations, and even the major providers are trying to come out with their own and copyright terms like cloud technology and computing and all those sort of things, right? There's lots of different ones. But as you see in this chart, right, the further you go across here, the further control you're given to the cloud service provider in relation to these areas. So in a snapshot, you need to work out, what control am I giving away? What responsibility am I giving away? It's not as simple as found a cool website, found a great provider, or even talk to a sales guy. It's all great. You need to understand fully what you're actually engaging with. And as I go through the other points, you'll see how important that is. So if we look on premises at the moment, like if you are running your own computer room and so on, you pretty much manage all the layers in relation to computing and how things are handled. Welcome. You've got your applications, your data, your operating system, your storage, all those good things. You go for the infrastructure as a service model. You're managing this piece, platform, or software as a service. Now, this isn't an exact science, the cloud, but that gives you a good idea of what we mean by areas of responsibility. So who's responsible for patching, who's responsible for updates, who's responsible for data protection, data encryption. 1,000 questions you need to ask around this area. So it's very, very important to understand control and responsibility and which part's going to the cloud service provider. And I can guarantee you, you're not going to deal with one cloud service provider. So you're going to have that overlap again. You're going to have those issues about working out who's covering what. Regulatory compliance. If I was in any other country, people sit up and they take this deadly seriously. In Ireland, unfortunately, it's not enforced very well, although the laws are actually here. But it's just not enforced to the extent that I feel it should be, in relation to when there's breaches or people just don't up their game and do what they should do. But let me talk about one particular thing that probably affects most of you, which is the Data Protection Act. In fact, it does affect most of you, because all people, we've all got personal data, and we want to know when we pass it over to people that they will protect it, keep it secure, and keep it legal at the end of the day. I spoke a couple of weeks ago with the Data Protection Commissioner, and we're just completely poles apart in relation to the attitude towards people's privacy and what should be done and so on and that. But if I give you an idea of this, there's a black and white list maintained under the Data Protection Act of countries that it's safe and legal to exchange information with. Bolivia is on the white list. The USA is on the black list. And you have to get special permission, put special conditions in place to exchange information with the states under the law in Ireland. And most people don't realise that. They sign up with an American cloud provider, even if it's just for a newsletter listing and whatever like that. They've just broken the law by exchanging information across borders. So just to give you a taste of what it means in relation to the international side of things and regulations. The European Convention on Cybercrime, drop the word European out of it for a second, right? It's the international Convention on Cybercrime, if you like. America signed up and ratified this. The UK signed up and ratified this. Pretty much every civilized nation signed up and ratified this. And for the first time, it's almost become like an international law to define what cybercrimes look like, from hacking, copyright infringement, all those sort of things. Ireland has not ratified it yet. I think 2 years ago, it was just there. So I don't know, maybe another 5 years we'll be there. Don't mean to be cynical, but there's a real hold-up on the strategy around this, which is affecting businesses and our opportunity in the cloud. And veins will be up on my neck in the last presentations about that, because it's really holding up Irish businesses and the opportunities we could do. Directors under this law are responsible for security. Full stop. Right? Directors will go to jail. It'll become criminal offences and so on like that. We've seen it with Google and directors in Italy and so on like that going off in handcuffs because somebody posted inappropriate videos up on websites. No excuses. If you can't prove you did everything you could to prevent the crime happening, you're going to be responsible. And that is the flavour and the nature and the tone that's changing in relation to regulations. The US Patriot Act. A little bit of background on this. This came in after 9/11. Some of you will be very familiar with it. It's basically a law which allows the law enforcement of the United States to go in and access information, right, of any kind. The difference with this is huge. It's very easy for a low-level FBI agent to get permission under this law to actually access information. And with the recent attacks you may have seen in the media with things like the anonymous hacking group and Lulzsec and so on, there was massive collateral damage with cloud service providers, where these heavy-booted guys walked in, picked up servers and walked out. What was on those servers? 199 legitimate clients and maybe one guy who had talked about assassinating the president or something like that. So there's massive knock-on collateral damage. Now, this has got people confused, because people are saying, you don't want to go to America and use a cloud service provider that's hosting information in America, because that gives them the permission to access all our information. Or affect our operations by accessing someone's information who happens to be in the same data center. Right? It mightn't be anything to do with you at all, but you might have that knock-on effect. This, to me, is a golden opportunity for Ireland to pick a scrap with the States and say, you ain't getting the information if you try and take it from Ireland. Right? So everybody will get the message that if you host with a cloud service provider in Ireland, your information will be safe and will not be given off to a foreign government, essentially. And that's just my own view on that particularly. Asked the question 2 weeks ago, the Data Protection Commissioner shrugged his shoulder. He says, sure, why would you mind your information going to America? I mean, it's just insane. But it's a huge marketing opportunity, if nothing else. Never mind in Europe, we have a human right. It goes to the Human Rights Act why we have privacy. We have a human right to it. You don't have it in the States. Completely different when you get into the laws and regulations around that side of it. Okay, privileged user access. We're all familiar with the concept and term of administrator IDs or the SA admin account or whatever it happens to be. Cloud service provider comes in, nice shiny tie, nice suit, tells you everything's good, whatever. Right? What's behind the facade? How long have they been around? What controls have they got in place? How do they vet their employees? You are giving the keys of the kingdom to somebody. You're giving them your information. Now, there's some safeguards you can do. You can encrypt and all those good things, whatever. But essentially, you're giving someone your administrator ID to all your data. And you're giving anyone that they use administrator access to all your data and everything else like that. So if there is a leak that's share price sensitive, or if there is an embarrassing news story that gets out, whatever, how did it get out? You don't start pointing the finger at your own people, because it could be your cloud service provider or that party. So you need to make sure, like Aircom, you're ISO 27001 certified with your data center, because that's pretty much one of the only decent controls that you're going to know are in place, that the data center, not just technically, but managed by people and processes, is done correctly. Right? So look for that with any cloud service provider you have with putting any data that you want. So say you wouldn't give someone all your data without asking what they're going to do with it, would you? And that's essentially, there's this implicit trust, nice cool website, everything else. I've seen tons of cases of it, and the data arrives up on other sites and gets copied or hacked or whatever it happens to be. Data provenance. When an auditor comes into you, whether it's a data protection auditor, whether it's Sarbanes-Oxley, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter the regulation, whatever. First of all, keep in mind, these regulations weren't written with the cloud in mind. Secondly, these auditors don't exactly understand the cloud. The way the industry works, most times it is accounting auditors that go on a 2-day course to learn how to read the checklist, and they come in and they ask you the questions. If you can't fully satisfy them, that you're actually handling things correctly or that they're being done. And one of those questions they'll ask you is, how do you prove that the information that comes back to you from the cloud is exactly what you posted up? Now think about that question, because that's hard to do, you know. That's going to be very difficult to actually prove. Well, the cloud provider said it is. No, no good. You can abdicate, you can't, you know, abdicate, as I say. So you need to think about data provenance and being able to have some sort of, especially if you look at things like Sarbanes-Oxley. Sarbanes-Oxley essentially was around financial accounting and proving that the figures that come out at the end of the system are the same ones that went in, and nobody fiddled with it in between. Okay? And there's a whole industry came out of that. 1% of turnover of companies in the States was spent on Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. Huge, huge area. And that's the sort of tone again and the feel for regulation and compliance that will come in around that. So data provenance. Did I skip on there? Yeah, no, there we go. Remnants and destruction. I think we've got critical data systems here today. Are they? No, they were signed up anyway. Critical data systems, the guys that deal on if you've got a damaged hard drive, they can bring it back. Whether we all know or not, I'll refresh your minds on this. When you delete a file, it's not gone. Right? But there's many techniques to get rid of or destruct data, and it's one of these security issues that challenge us all the time. Do you go for physical destruction? Do you go with degaussing, where you overwrite all the data? The military standard and the US government standard is overwrite everything 7 times. That takes a long time. Not exactly environmentally friendly either, the amount of electricity and so on it uses to do that. So how do you do that? Okay, now think of when you're dealing with a cloud service provider. Let's say you take 10 gigs, and then you decide, oh, I don't need 10 gigs anymore, I need 5. What happened to that slack space on the disk? Is that just being reallocated to somebody who can go in and undelete your files or see your files or whatever? Right? What happens when a hard drive fails? Is it the policy of the cloud service provider to send it back under warranty? Or do they take the hit on the cost of it and destruct the drive? Or is your data just gone off to a third party? These are the sort of questions you need to think about the flow of your data and how it's handled. Location segregation. Touched upon location in relation to regulatory compliance and so on like that. But segregation, how are the divisions going to be handling this? What country is it in? What laws are governed? Who has access to it? Andy mentioned Amazon Web Services, and I know that they're looking at being able to run an instance just within Ireland. But at the same time, they have, under the US Patriot Act, said that at the end of the day, they will hand over information, so on like that. So these are around the SLAs, and we'll go into those at the very end. But you need to work out, where is my data? You know, am I going to host it somewhere that there's a whole separate set of laws or a whole separate set of things that I need to comply with because it's in a particular location or within. It might even be at more risk when it goes to particular areas as well, depending on political and geographical things and so on like that. So you need to think of those. Who's going to have access to it? The government of that nation or whatever it happens to be. So if we look, smaller cloud providers are not carrying cyber insurance and have no plans to. So you need to think about this. If you happen to go with a cloud provider that has any sort of political affiliation or anything, this may become a risk factor for you. I see this in the world of cybersecurity all the time, where all of a sudden an insurance company will start getting hacked. And I go, why are we getting hacked all of a sudden? Everybody's after us. And what's happened is that word has got out that they're insuring a life science company. So all the hacktivists get together and go, we're going to attack that insurance company because they're actually playing ball with a life science company. So there can be these sort of tangent knock-on effects related to your risk. So you just got to think very broad about where your data is going and so on like that. It's shared. How is it going to be controlled? What accountability is there? How is CIA? The confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of your asset. Ask them that. Ask them that question. How do you ensure my data is confidential? How do you ensure it's not changed? How do you ensure it's available? What backups have you got? Blah, blah, blah. What resilience, what redundancies are in place and so on. That. What happens if there's an investigation? If you're running, most compliance standards, as I've already mentioned, use log management and use logs in relation to tracking things like that. But are they going to be able to segregate your logs on your access to the system? Or, you know, how is an investigation? So you're going to have to think about things like right to audit clauses and stuff like that, because you need to be able to go in, if you're dealing with maybe an internal issue with an employee or an external piece of fraud or whatever it happens to be, you need to be able to go in and deal with the cloud provider. Here's another one to think about. What happens if you go with the cloud provider and the relationship sours, or you've outgrown them, or whatever it happens to be, and you decide, I want to go to a new one? How do you get your information back? When do you get it back and in what format? Will it be in a proprietary format? Or will it be just that you virtualize your SQL or whatever it is, your servers and so on and so on? So you need to ask these questions and think beyond the cloud provider you're dealing with. And what will it look like if you ever have to move as well? Or what will it look like in the event of any sort of incident and how it would work? Okay, that leads nicely into disaster recovery and business continuity. Most cloud service providers can talk the talk about this, but scratch the surface. Right? Standard contracts generally don't involve you having any backups, and if they are, they're pretty much, oh yeah, one a week or one a month or whatever, right? You need to make sure that you have the continuity area and risk covered in relation to this. You need to make sure that you've got down to the surface. Go and visit their data center. You know, go and see it. Open the doors. Go in. Make sure security guards stop you and make you sign in. Go and see where the generators are. Go and see where the UPS is. Have a look at these things, because if you're putting your business over, you're not going to go in blind faith that some sales guy came in and told you this was the way to go. So service level agreements should be thoroughly checked and reviewed to ensure they align with the business requirements for the proceed. Make sure what you're signing with your CSP, your cloud service provider, is legal from the point of view of how you're doing your business. Because you need to make sure that they're not going to take your data and, on your behalf, break the law, if you like, in relation to that. Encryption. Encryption is probably your friend in the cloud in some extent, but you need to make sure it's being used properly, there's proper key management, everything else like that. Because getting back to my slide about keys of the kingdom and people have access to your data, of course you can encrypt it. But with some cloud service providers, they have controls around that, but you need to make sure the keys are managed. What's their policy if the US Patriot Act kicks in and data is encrypted? Are you going to be forced to give over keys? All that sort of stuff. There's a speed issue as well, and all those. And make sure your backups are encrypted as well. They're the sort of, you know, detail you need to ask. Okay. Long-term viability. Okay. This is one of the biggest ones, because these days, cloud providers, or the word cloud in front of pretty much every company, is popping up. And how do you trust them? If you can't get in your car and drive to them, like you can with an indigenous firm, and see what they're doing and so on like that, you're trusting what you're reading on Google and the web and so on like this. I'm telling you from experience, a lot of it's fraud and a lot of it's bull. Right? They can take all the pictures they want of data centers and tell you they have DDoS mitigation and all these sort of things in place, but you need to scratch the surface. You need to get proof. You need to get evidence. Why? Because the auditor's going to come. By the way, just on DDoS mitigation, we're going to cyber threats, but Paul Stedman from Adversaries here today. If anybody has any issues or questions around, I'd be happy to introduce them to you later on at the break. And they're a DDoS mitigation provider, because I know I got a lot of questions after the last event we did. So long-term viability. Is this company going to be around? What are their books like? How long have they been around? What's their structure? What's their plan? Are they going to adapt? Is this somebody that's going to be in business with me and be able to grow with me and work with me and so on like that? From my side, I like to deal with indigenous companies, because I can see them, I can feel them, I can touch it, it's kinetic to a certain extent. You're taking a bigger risk deal on the virtual side of things in relation to that. And I'll get onto that in my next presentation round, where there's opportunities for almost a broker agreement with these bigger providers and things like that. Okay, but if you look at recent stories, people are buying out people left, right and centre. It's a changing platform. In the cloud world, it's very immature at the moment. But I could tell you the big players obviously are Google, Amazon and Dell and people like that are in the good place. Okay, cyber threats, my particular area of specialty. I won't dwell too much on this, but I have a few slides on it, because the cloud is very interesting in a couple of ways in this. Andy mentioned the Tor cloud. Some of you probably knew what the Tor cloud was, and some of you didn't. What about a thing called Facebook? Right, we'll talk about that and how that can affect in the cloud. The cloud is a very good thing, but it can be used for bad purposes as well. It can be used to manufacture attacks on sites. If you even look at how the LulzSec attacks, anonymous attacks, were done, they used a thing called low orbit ion cannon, and they did DDoS attacks by people volunteering, basically kids volunteering, to become part of this across the cloud and attack sites. Hence they were able to take it down the IMF, sites like that, you know, huge sites. So cyber threats are made up of cyber warfare, cybercrime, cyber terrorism, and what I call cyber scum. Right? Pretty much anything that involves a computer or the internet is a cybercrime. A friend of mine's Paul Gillen, the head of the Computer Crime Investigation Unit, the Garda Síochána, top guy, whatever, and he makes a great point to this. He says, what crime doesn't involve a phone? Or doesn't involve a computer or whatever. And that's why those guys are flat out dealing with cybercrime all the time, because all the evidence is on the phone, or it's with the phone carrying the telco or whatever it happens to be. So you've got to think that this is, and it's $1 trillion economy, cybercrime. right? And it's a whole separate agenda to talk about that. We've actually have an event in January, if anybody's interested in that as well, coming up on that as well. And one of the many reasons it's developed is because it's got so easy. There's been a development of malicious tools, crimeware if you like, that makes this child's play and very easy for people to go in and orchestrate an attack, whether it's a DDoS attack or whether it's hacking in or key logging or whatever it happens to be. And it's quite simple and straightforward now to do these things. But this is what gives me a bit of a giggle as well, is the criminals, the cyber criminals, actually operate in the cloud as well. Right? This is a cloud-based service delivered by cyber criminals where you can go in and you can pick through what sort of data you want to extract. I want credit cards from Ireland with a credit limit above 5,000. I want the date of birth. I want the home address. Boom. And they'll extract out the list for you, an online database, and you pay for it by credits and so on. So cyber criminals are adapting their business model to the cloud. Right? So it's interesting from that side of things. Tiny bit on social media here, because I mentioned Facebook. To most people, these are the main sort of, LinkedIn I suppose should be up there as well. But these are the main sort of social media sites. But the reality is, there's cajillions of these sites out there. ICTTF.org is a social media site to an extent. If you have a particular area of interest, and people gather around to discuss that interest, you've got yourself a social media site. Right? If you get 500 or 600 million people on a site, you've got something serious. You've got a weapon of mass destruction in one way across the cloud, because if it can be used to attack something, you've got a major problem. And if we look, say, for example, at Facebook, I'm not picking on Facebook particularly because it's really, we just need to think of these measures. One, from how we adopt social media and get into it, but the other side is what these cloud service providers may involve us in without us even realizing it. So getting back to the European Convention on Cybercrime and things like that. We've got 500 million people. This slide's old, so you can add on 20% onto this. Right? 900 million objects, 70 languages, 20 million applications a day, and 20 million mobile users. Right? It's the third biggest country in the world. So after China and India. Criminals go where people go. So what criminals are doing, cyber criminals, is they hang out on social media sites, they infiltrate people, they use the cloud. So Facebook's a cloud-based system. They use that to actually access your staff. They use that to pick up information, socially engineer information, so on like that. So say I won't go too far down on that. Okay. Investigations and support. Illegal and inappropriate activity. What detective controls has your cloud service provider got in place to tell you that you're being hacked? Will they tell you if there's been an incident? Will they tell you if one of the tenants in the data center has been DDoSed and that you might have to expect performance issues or there might be some sort of latency? These are the sort of questions. If it hits the fan and you need to investigate, how cooperative are they going to be? Are they going to charge you? Do they even have the information? Can they extract it for you? Let me tell you a little sideline on this in relation to, say, for example, Salesforce. Salesforce have one of the biggest success stories in the world, obviously, around using cloud-based technology and so on like that. And I was dealing with a senior member of a large insurance company. And he told me that he went in, he had all his reports saved and all these sort of things that they had in there. And under the terms and conditions and the SLA of the cloud service provider was, I think it was 30 days that they would only stay there if they weren't used and they were gone. He was away on holidays, came back, stuff's gone. Right? And that's it. Got onto the cloud service provider and said, listen, all my information's gone, I need these reports. Oh, sorry, see the terms and conditions, your information's gone. Do you know who I am? Was his response. And within hours, that information was back. Right? So they didn't actually stick to their own SLA about destructing the information, get rid of it. It was somewhere. Right? And he was able to get back to it. So what information are they keeping? Can you access it for investigations and support and so on like that? What procedures have they got in place? Do they have an investigation team? Can they have expert witnesses that will handle log management, the chain of custody of information and so on like that when you're doing it? You need to make sure you're dealing with professionals who are geared up for this. So cheap and cheerful isn't the best way to go from a professional perspective when you're dealing with cloud providers. You need to go with the mature ones, the ones that have been in the business a long time and have adopted their model to the cloud. Finally on this is the legal and contractual. If you take one message away from my presentation on this, well, take two, right? The cloud is actually a very good thing, right? I don't mean to scare you out of it, but I just want you to be very aware of what's in it. But know what you sign. Andy's spot on, right? You go in, you get an SLA, take it or leave it. Now that gives an opportunity, from a business point of view, for organizations to say, well, actually, we can act as your middleman, your broker, and we'll deal with this and we'll deal with that and so on like that. But you have to know what you sign and make sure that it is going to fit in with your GRC requirements. And you can delegate, but you can't abdicate. Don't just make this an IT decision or an information security decision or anything like that. Make sure you involve legal, internal audit, compliance, risk. Any of the key stakeholders need to make this decision, because you're only going to know your perspective in relation to what you want out of the cloud. But this is, as Andy was saying, this is about re-architecture, planning for failure. How's that all going to work? And these things do go down. I mean, even for this event, I used a ticketing agent in the cloud called Amiando. Just hundreds of thousands of tickets a year. Went down yesterday for about 2 hours, as it happens. You need to plan for these things to fail. But you know what goes through your body when that happens? You go, there's nothing I can do. There's absolutely nothing I can do, right? They're out there in the cloud, right? I can't go in and fix the server. I can't reboot it. I can't get my cool techie guy in to fix it. I can't do any of those things. I'm helpless, right? And I'm trying to do this. So think about that before you sign, right, in what you're doing. You need to have trust there or whatever. So, to finish off on this, I said mind the gap, and that's what this is really about. You're going to step off, or you're going to step onto that train of cloud computing, and you just need to be aware of what the dangers are as you go over. And hopefully I've summarized those over these top 10, and obviously there's a lot more, and there's a lot more intricacies around them. And what I'm going to do now is, thank you for your attention and your time for that. I'm going to hand you over to Matthew from VigiTrust, who will talk about PCI compliance. So thank you very much.